Welcome back, everyone. It is time for our next discussion. This discussion is entitled Fundraising Sucks, but You Gotta Do It. Giving us this discussion today is Kaki, Friskics-Warren, and Joseph Gutierrez. Please join me in welcoming them for this discussion.
Great. Thanks for having us here to talk about fundraising because we all just love the act of fundraising. I'm Kaki Friskics-Warren. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here with my colleague, Joseph.
Hey everyone, Joseph Gutierrez. He, him are my pronouns. I think when we think about fundraising really quickly, thinking about the context of the moment, and sort of when we think about our resistance and, how we activate people, I think there's two things. You need organized people and you need organized resources. So I think it's always really important to think about, what fundraising looks like and different modes of fundraising so we can actually mobilize people with resources to enact change. So really quickly, we're going to try this quick activity because we want people to maybe be a little bit involved. So if you're here, can you pull out your phones and then maybe scan this QR code? And we have a few interactive questions we'll be trying. So if you're at home using this virtually, go ahead and pull this QR code up or go to menti.com and put in that 8-digit number. But I'll give everybody a quick sec to do that, and then we'll maybe get to the first question right after that. But it looks like people are joining, so I'm really glad because I didn't know if this was gonna work. So thanks for joining, which is really cool. And then I'll go ahead and jump to this next question just really quickly so we can get a quick show of hands. Is how much fundraising experience do you have? So this is our first question. So if we can go ahead and fill it out, take a quick second while you're on your phone, and then we'll pull up the responses really quick. Oh, I think it's set up like a game, but we can just ignore that. Cool. So it looks like here we have most people have just a little bit of fundraising experiences. We have a few nuns, and we have a few people that have a lot of experience, which is really cool. And then some people and no professionals in the room, which is okay because professional fundraising is a really hard job, and it's like some of the people that we work with through our jobs at the Mannix Fund. But cool. And then we got one more question. Now, how do you feel about fundraising? Which is our second question. And again, thanks for participating in this because we weren't sure how it was going to work. So this is great. Is it working? Is that, yeah? Cool. I think so. Cool. It looks like I can't actually even see the answers, so we'll just move ahead. But just keep that in mind and sort of thinking, how you feel about fundraising. And I know that a lot of people usually feel nervous or a little bit unsure about what it looks like to be a fundraiser or try to think about fundraising. But some of the stuff we're going to talk about is moving fundraising in new directions and new ways for you to really conceptualize and think about what fundraising is to you and sort of what we can think about. So I'm going to pass it over to Kaki, who will explain some of the different philosophies around fundraising.
I'm going to let you change the things, if you will. We thought we'd start with talking about philosophies of fundraising because it really does kind of undergird how we do our planning, what our behaviors are. And for the most part, we're inundated with this donor-centric model of fundraising. And those are very traditional approaches that if you do power analysis, then the power is with the donor. And this kind of sense in which donor knows best, and that everything that we do is to please and to kowtow to the donor. And I know when I was on the fundraising end, I don't know how many times I sat and listened to donors tell me how I should do my job when I really knew what I was doing, and but I had to sit there and listen because they had the power. What that does on the nonprofit side is it kind of creates this competition. Can I please the donor more? I've actually heard a nonprofit use the word of a competitive advantage in fundraising. And so in case you think this doesn't live itself out in real time, just yesterday on April 13th, an article came out called "A Plea for Philanthropic Freedom." And it has unleashed a shit show on social media. I mean, there's conversation going back and forth because this article talked about donor prerogative, again, centering donor power, and that we can assume that the philanthropist has their best intention in mind. And I don't know about you, but I don't think people in power always have my best intention in mind. And so what it was really nice to see is the theme of this conference, that all identities pulling together. And it was great that Dr. Franklin kind of set the tone by the Audre Lorde quote that we don't live single issue lives, and by the Martin Luther King quote about the tapestry that ties us all together and that our shared liberation is related to each other. And so I'd like to introduce you to a different model of fundraising, moving away from that donor-centric, donor power model to what's called the community-centric model. And it's an idea of fundraising that centers the community instead of just the individual or the individual organization. And it tries to put power in the hands of those with lived experience. So I'd like to suggest that that is a model that is more in keeping with the theme of this conference and how we should be moving forward together. So some of the pillars of community-centric fundraising: that fundraising is rooted and grounded in race, equity, and social justice; that an individual's mission is not as important as the collective community. So what that might look like for y'all is maybe there are different Lambda chapters that are raising money from a same donor. Why not go together? Why not show that donor that we understand that we are pulling together, that our identities are intertwined? And that is certainly a different way of saying we're in a shared relationship, and not only in our single issue, but also in our fundraising, that we treat donors like partners. And that means we have occasionally difficult conversations with donors. And let me give you an example of that. Donors, because they want to have the power, will often say, I'd like to designate my money for this event, or I'd like to designate my money for Christmas gifts for needy children. And so a response to that might be, you could designate your gift like that, but what we really need is undesignated dollars so that we can be agile in the face of changing events, like what has happened in the last 2 weeks, or what's happened in this legislature that Dr. Franklin talked about. So having difficult conversations with donors is important. It also, that community-centered fundraising fosters a sense of belonging and not othering. And that's certainly what the theme of this conference embodies as well. And that we recognize that healing and liberation requires a commitment to economic justice. So the QR code is there for you to learn more about community-centric fundraising. If you really want to geek out and kind of follow the dialogue that's going on about this, also follow a group called Nonprofit AF. It is one of the funniest websites that you can follow because they are constantly critiquing this traditional way of fundraising and how foundations really have policies and procedures that just perpetuate that donor-centric model. So we'd like to kind of propose a different way of thinking about fundraising. That let's think about fundraising as furthering your justice work. It is furthering that liberation that we desire for all, and it lifts all identities. We're talking about fundraising that centers relationships, authentic relationships, not the relationship that the donor necessarily has traditionally wanted, and that it's a place of belonging. So that means we're fundraising together in cooperation with other Lambda chapters, with other issues whether it's neurotypical and neurodivergent, whether it's people with abilities and different abilities, all of those things are intertwined, and that we are going to foster a sense of belonging versus a sense of othering in our fundraising. because again, we are moving towards a shared liberation. So there's a new question. I'm going to get Jacob.
Yeah, so question 3, I think a few people have already answered, but the question is, when you're thinking about giving in the United States, where do you think most of the money comes from? So you have a few different options if you haven't answered already. But I think it's just really important to think about, how do organizations and groups get actually funded here in the United States? And we have a few different answers, and some of them will trickle in, but the correct answer is actually individuals. And we'll go over some of the slides really quickly, just to think about what it looks like. But here's the best kind of estimate, and these are the most recent numbers if we looked at the giving in 2020, and if you looked at these by the billions. So actually, corporations, which a few people actually answered, is actually the smallest sliver of where dollars in the nonprofit sector actually come from. And then so the next biggest one is the bequests with 41 for almost 42 billion, and then foundations making up 88.5 billion. So foundations are like the Maddox Fund where we work at, and then also other foundations like the Gates Foundation, Mackenzie Scott, the Yield Giving Fund, and stuff like that. But most giving in the nonprofit sector actually comes from individuals. So that's why we want to center, any good fundraising plan must account for individual donors, right? So people every day, and sort of making plans and really thinking about raising funds and what that looks like. The question, I guess, like that naturally follows, where does all of this go? So where does actually most of the funding in the philanthropic sector actually go each year? And most of it's actually tied to religious institutions. So most of these are actually given in tithes to churches. So 131 billion actually goes, and that's over a quarter of all funding in the philanthropic sector. Next, the biggest issue across the United States is actually education. So a lot of work here too, like this spans like K-12, early education, and higher ed too. So education is the next part. Human services is the third most. And then human services can encompass a lot of different things, but that's usually next. And then sometimes that includes health. It depends where you get for those statistics too, but health and human services follows pretty quickly. Next is foundations. Foundations shows up again here. This is actually spending done by foundations that raise their own money. So sort of like the Make-A-Wish Foundation, who raises funds for their own sort of work. And then to round out the top 5 is the next Public Benefit Society. This is also a general catch-all for a lot of social justice kind of work that supports the general public.
So we're going to talk a little bit about a fundraising cycle. And honestly, this is pretty much just logic in terms of how do we enter relationships and sustain valuable relationships. So I'm going to talk through just a little bit of this fundraising cycle. So the first step in fundraising is how do you identify a potential donor? And a lot of times, as he said, the group that gives the most money is individuals. So getting over that fear of just asking individuals for their support. So identifying who might be on your list, think about family and friends, think about alumni of the Lambda chapter that are now out making money, hopefully. Think about peer organizations. If I were thinking about fundraising, I'd look at the last 3 years of Pride Parade and who were the corporate sponsors there and who was engaged with Pride Parade, because we know that they're already aware of our concerns and our issues. One of the things as you're thinking about identifying possible supporters is that sometimes you're going to want to have a negative screen. I'm going to give you an example. And I used to serve a women's organization, and someone said, I can get this country music person to do a show for y'all, but a lot of his music was misogynistic. And we kind of looked at it. We said, no, we can't put his name and our name together. And similarly, someone may say, boy, we could get Chick-fil-A for this event. And you may say, we really can't have that at our event. So negative screens are important. And also, as you're identifying possibly a donor acceptance policy, a place that I worked, we said we cannot take money from private prisons. It works counter to our mission. So think about, as you're identifying, are there ways to identify our natural allies, but also are there negative screens or gift acceptance policies that we need to think about in order to maintain our integrity as an organization. So then after you've identified some, you kind of have to evaluate. Frequently, we put them, these donors, we know they're give, these might, and these are kind of organizations or donors that are less likely to give, but we still need to be nurturing that relationship. But you have to think about what is a donor passionate about? Because again, you want a donor base that is in line with and supportive of and is a relationship with your issues and extended issues. And so you're looking at what motivates them, but also I frequently say, what gives a donor hope? Because don't we all want to be part of a movement that is not only going to change things, but is going to keep us hopeful about that change? And so evaluate your donors in many different ways. And that's something that you as a group can decide how you want to prioritize donors. And then cultivate is a word that's traditional, but really it's about building relationships. How do we build a relationship with this person or this group or this corporation that will allow us to further their interest in our issues? So traditional things would be newsletters and e-newsletters, but also think about how do we engage them on social media? If we have an email list, how do we do that? And inviting them to functions, inviting someone who may have never walked in Borough Pride or in the Nashville Pride Parade, invite them to join your group. Again, this sense of belonging is the way that we begin to build not just short-term relationships like a one-time ask, but long-term relationships of repeated givers. And then, of course, the challenge of the ask. So when I first started doing fundraising, I could do all the preliminaries, but when it came to the time to be an ask, there's this big wad, formed in my throat. I could hardly get the words out. Would you consider a gift of? But I think it's important that we also realize that it's not just money we can be working with, asking for, because money follows other things. We frequently talk about this. It's a traditional kind of thing of time, talent, and treasure. If you give us your time to march with us, if you give us your talent of laying out newsletters, then money, when it's available, will eventually follow. The other kind of quip is about wisdom, wealth, and work. If you'll give us some of your wisdom and your work, then we know that some of your money will follow. And money, as Joseph said, money is an organizing resources, is part of the movement for change and justice. And so think of it as a larger, it's not just big you asking for money for a salary. That one of the things that's important in an ask is that you be yourself, that you're authentic to who you are, and you ask in the way that you would ask, not the way that someone else would ask. And after you have asked, it is important to thank people and not, let me go back to the ask, because I do want to talk about some kind of a traditional way of fundraising. If you've ever been to fundraising events, is you get this emotive story and you're moved and that sort of thing. And so you're moved to give. Well, that's a strategy, but let's also be really careful when we're making those asks that we're not re-traumatizing people by asking them to tell their story over and over and over again. And so in nonprofit and fundraising, that's kind of called trauma porn, that we put trauma out there in order to motivate people to give. Then possibly that donor is not the donor that you need if they're needing that kind of titillating fundraising tactics. So again, that goes back to your strategy and identifying donors that you might want or not want. But either way, thanking people. I mean, that's kind of what I was taught, is that you remember to say thank you to people, whether they're picking up dishes from your table or whether they've given you a monetary gift. It's important to invite them to things. Again, a march, a conference like this, get them connected into the work that you're doing, because isn't that what we all long for? We long to be connected. We long to feel belonging. We long to be part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And this movement that you're part of invites people to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. And finally, stewarding is that piece that keeps people giving over and over and over again. That happens with ongoing communication, kind of reports and newsletters, but it also helps. It's just through human connection to one another. So offering opportunities for people to gather, whether it's virtually or in person, to build those relationships is really essential to that long-term fundraising. I'm going to give it back to Joseph.
And just really quick, and from the stewarding point, it's cyclical. So right, like, so from the stewarding of relationship, ideally the fundraising cycle is a cycle, and it's a relationship that you keep long term. So you're continually thinking about ways to engage people and keep people informed about the work that they're supporting, and then finding new ways to get them involved. But we don't want to leave you with just some of that, so we wanted to throw out a few quick ideas that I think make a lot of sense for people. But there's a few different typologies people have for what fundraising can look like, but here's a quick kind of summary of them. So there's direct solicitation. So that's literally just asking people for money. And then so you can be very direct, and that's also very helpful. Sometimes you don't need to spend all the effort, particularly like if you're at an event, like, or if you're like tabling at like a farmer's market or a conference even, stuff like that, or fundraising allowed. Sometimes it's just, here's the ask, here's support our work, $5 helps do this. Next is special events. This takes a little bit of organization, and sometimes the payoff isn't very high. So it's just really important to think about, what kind of fundraising events make a lot of sense for the audience you're really working with. And again, that goes back to that first step of identifying, who you're forming relationships with. So you can see some very elaborate like galas that are black tie, formal events that can raise a lot of money. And then sometimes those cost so much that you actually end up some organizations don't raise very much through some of those special events. So, but special events can actually also be very casual. There's actually a really big push now for like porch parties for fundraising. So a lot of people are really thinking about, inviting people to house parties where people can fundraise, just meet people, see some of the work, make relations with like staff members or participants and stuff like that. So those are really informal ways that make a lot of sense. So if you're thinking about a special event, that might be really easy, particularly if you're like a college student. The other kind of piece there too is social media and crowdfunding. So just a lot of like online social appeals. So like really thinking about, what kind of donation platform do you have set up, or, even if it's just sharing a Venmo account, like making a push on a specific day. So sometimes there's like really specific days where it makes a lot of sense to start fundraising. So I work with an Asian and Pacific Islander nonprofit organization, and May is actually Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. So we'll actually do a whole online social giving campaign, trying to get people to think about giving in May because they're already thinking about our work. So finding those kind of spots too, right? Like, Pride Month might be a good time to really start raising funds and things like that. The next other kind of way to think about is sponsorships. And that could also tie into events and stuff like that. But this is where corporate giving really comes into play. Some kind of thoughts that maybe make sense for like finding corporate donors is looking at other organizations and groups that have sponsored events and see who's sponsoring them. So really even thinking about, when you're doing this identifying process and researching, it's finding some of the corporations that might just want to sponsor. And then there's also like a bunch of places you can kind of check too, right? Like, so you can look with like the Tennessee Pride Chamber, right? If you wanted to find local businesses that were already kind of open and affirming, the Pride Chamber has a full list of that business directory. So it might be worth finding like, is there a business or a restaurant nearby that can sponsor an event or even host like an informal dinner for our organization and stuff like that. Then is grants, and then grants are kind of hard. And there's a whole lot of work you can do on grants and trying to find them, but just really quickly, you can look at the foundation directory online. And that's a place that has some open grant kind of applications you can have. And that's a really good place to start looking. You can also look at the Center for Nonprofit Management and just reach out to them, and they'll probably be able to provide some help in sort of pointing in the right direction. If you're thinking about writing grants, they have a few workshops to teach you like what are best practices and stuff like that. Or just reach out to Kaki and myself. We're more than happy to help you and talk you through a grant, since that's a lot of our work. Next is cause marketing and earn income and social enterprise. A lot of this kind of gets tied in together, but sometimes it's just selling merchandise, or sometimes it's really thinking about, those kind of campaigns that kind of spread awareness around like using like a specific item. Like one really good example, if a few decades back, maybe even, is like the Live Strong bracelets, like with Lance Armstrong, like those yellow bracelets. So it's sort of like those kind of touch pieces and promotional materials that help bring awareness and then potentially raise funds. Just some quick thoughts, around the direct solicitation, some really quick ideas here are text and phone banking parties. So really thinking about, if your student group wanted to just come together like during one of your meetings, and then just designate some of that time as a fundraising time. So like literally people will just pull out their phones and start texting people. And then you can develop a sort of like prompt, which people can have like, hey, my name is blah, blah, blah. And like, me, this is the things we can do in support. So sometimes it's calling people or just texting people and making that direct ask. And that pays off more than one would think. I think those are really helpful for just really quick funds needed, like specifically if you're trying to do something like in a given time frame. These are really easy to do. Birthday fundraisers, these are really simple to kind of set up and have people kind of do. Like particularly if you're working on Facebook. You can also fundraise on Instagram now too. Instagram now takes donations. And there are a few other options where you can set up like another kind of fundraiser for somebody. Newsletters and social media posts, it's just, again, making the ask very directly, like here's a donation link. And then even putting like the donation amounts, that's also very helpful too. So if you set like $10, $15, or $25, and then 50 and 100, those are also really helpful because people just usually click on those when they go through it. And then another kind of idea here too is also a match campaign. One really good example from this is my friend who is also fundraising for the Asian and Pacific Islander group that I work with. She had a birthday fundraiser, but she also wanted to commit some of her own donations. So what she actually did is she structured this kind of fundraising thing, and she said if her friends could raise $1,000 for our organization, she would match that herself. So she would actually also donate $1,000. So it challenged people to give in that kind of really direct way, but also made it so that, there was a goal in mind and people really wanted to help her. And it was for her birthday. So a lot of different reasons, a lot of good touches, and a lot of reasons why somebody would give. So that was really easy direct solicitation. For merch, some really quick ideas. Stickers are always great, and then sell them for a few bucks, and then it also bring awareness. People put them on water bottles, put them on their car. Really easy. You can print like thousands for pretty cheap. Apparel, two really easy groups to work with are Bonfire. They do a lot of fundraising with t-shirts, and that's a really good platform to use because people can purchase on Bonfire. And then same thing with Printful too. Printful is like a print on demand website. So it's really easy, so you don't have to hold merchandise. People can order on their website, and then you just set up a little storefront, and then they order, and that way you're not holding on to like 50 shirts in the trunk of your car trying to get those around, and you're not busy mailing them. So it's actually really easy to do. And then you can set your own prices too, so that's also really good. One thing I think, to really think about are, what are unique items that are relevant to your work? So when you're really thinking about merch, think about your audience and how you want them engaged, right? So for the Asian Pacific Islander group that I work with, one of the merchandise items we have are a set of custom chopsticks. So like, really thinking about like lunchbox sets, and like those are the things we're really going to push that help people identify, it resonates with the organization we do and the type of work that we do. And it's something that maybe people want just beyond, a t-shirt. Because, even myself, I have a hard time buying shirts because I just don't like them. Like I don't want to wear merchandise and things that say somebody's organization. So what are the other things you can kind of create and make that are really helpful in advancing your cause and having people resonate with your work? And then community-made merch. This is also like a really good option, particularly thinking if there's somebody in your group or in your network that makes stuff, maybe thinking about a collaboration. And I think a lot of people can really think about, what does it look like to work with a local craftsperson on creating something? And then you can actually split the difference, because then I think you can, pay the artist a really fair wage on what that would look like, and then take a percentage of the profits and sort of thinking about that too. That also works really good with like sort of restaurant setup. Some restaurants set up stuff like that for fundraisers, so that's also a really good idea. And then, so that's like kind of things with the events too, like those sponsored fundraisers with the restaurants I was just talking about. I would think about, unique special events too. Like, again, thinking about what does it look like to have an event that matches your organization's culture and work. So, again, I keep going back to this Asian Pacific Islander group. One of the fundraisers and events that we're going to be planning for this winter is actually a casino night, but the casino night will actually be only using Asian games. So like Baccarat and a few different other Asian games you would find across like East and Southeast Asia. So it gets people thinking and it's kind of fun. A lot of LGBTQ plus serving organizations that I see in Nashville, a lot of them have a drag show as a fundraiser. Would be a really cool time right now to think about that and sort of thinking about, a drag show right now speaks as an act of resistance, and then also thinking about, as a way to raise funds for your cause. So I think there are a lot of different ideas you could do, and I'm not gonna ignore like the regular bake sale. Right? Bake sales are great, and they don't have to be like a bake sale, but just having people volunteer and donate, and then you selling that can go a long way. I mean, a lot of money is in individual donations to churches. Churches have always been doing bake sales. So what are the kind of easy ways to get your members involved and people involved and just to raise dollars? Oh, and yes, this is the next question on our interactive portion. And it's all right if you don't have it pulled up right now, but it's something I want you to take a quick second and think about. And really the question is, why do you donate either your time or money to the organization you're a part of now? And take a quick second to really reflect on that, because I think this question is very central into thinking about, what it looks like to fundraise. So it's important that you actually can articulate an answer to this. Cool. So I want you to just hold on to that thought. And like, as you kind of even flesh out that answer, because the next kind of piece that we're doing is really thinking about making an elevator pitch. And this is sort of like this active component where I think, every piece of fundraising is really built on this. Like, how do you talk about your organization quickly and effectively? So this elevator pitch, I mean, you might want to think about it like, a 90-second quick pitch to somebody when you have their attention, or like when you're trapped in an elevator, like a really quick time for you to actually make a pitch. And we'll start with there because like, I think in long term, when you're talking with funders, even large funders, it's just some variation of this, just it's different on the amounts of time you have and how much interaction you can have. Like, are you in front of a computer? Can you share? Are you doing this over by phone? Everything's really built on making an effective elevator pitch. So we have a few videos, and what we're going to do is we're going to view them. And I want you to maybe think about, why is this a good elevator pitch? Or what did you like about this? Would you donate? How much would you donate? So we're going to do 2 of these, and then we're going to help this. So if you can play this video, that'd be great.
Nashville Launchpad is Middle Tennessee's only LGBT affirming and young adult emergency shelter providing night-to-night shelter for young adults 18 to 24 experiencing homelessness and food insecurity. Since 2014, we have served over 1,300 young adults with more than 5,000 nights of safer sleep. Every dollar you give brings a young person off the street for a safer sleep. Will you join us?
Cool. And we're turning on the sound. So that first bit, this is H.G. Stovall. He's the director of Launchpad. And you said he's Launchpad. They're the only open and affirming emergency shelter program for young people in Nashville. So that's that. And then really quickly, if people want to raise their hand, what do they like about this? Just some quick interaction. What are your quick thoughts? If anybody wants to share? I don't want to call on people, but yes, in the back. Yeah, definitely. So they said it's very quick and to the point and really very clear that way. So yeah, that's really good. I think, elevator pitches again should be direct, especially when you're thinking about you only have a quick amount of time to make to make this ask of somebody or really trying to get them involved. And like, you know, you can think about this like when somebody's walking by you on campus. If you have a table set up on the quad, and like how much time do you actually have somebody while they're walking by or before they just walk off unengaged? So really think about being very quick and clear. So that's really great. Any other thoughts? Oh, sorry, right here, and then I'll move to that. Yeah, definitely. So they said filling a gap and making sure that highlighting that they're the only organization that's doing this kind of work. And, you know, highlighting your uniqueness is very important. Thinking about, you know, why does your work stand out when you're thinking about engaging funders? We got thoughts in the back? Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Any other? Yeah. Yeah, great. So then they said that they finished with a question, which, you know, opens the door for inviting the person they're talking to into engaging. So I think that's really great too. So we're going to move on to one more. We can.
National Launchpad is Milton.
Hi, my name is Terry Bell, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. The LGBTQ plus community has been suppressed for generations, not only worldwide, but also here in Tennessee. Today, I'm asking you to not only raise your voice, but to also help raise funds for the Tennessee Pride Chamber. They have dedicated themselves to promoting equality and diversity in businesses and our society in support of the LGBTQ plus community. I really hope that you'll consider giving a gift today that'll make a difference. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is my friend Terry. When I told her about this, she just sent me this right away. It's like she almost had this ready on her phone to send to me. So it sounds a little bit more commercially, but when we're thinking about this one, what did you like about this, or what are some of your thoughts? Again, let's review really quickly. Yep. Yeah, definitely. So they said that this video brought them in with her personality, and I think, you know, that's really great that Terry's playing to her strengths, because if you ever meet her in person, she's always very welcoming and always happy to share more about herself. Any other thoughts? Three, two, one. Okay, that's quick teacher silence. I used to teach, so that's fine. We'll just move on ahead. But no, that's great. So then, you know, here what I think about when we're thinking about what makes a very good pitch. So there's three pieces, you know, I think that you can highlight here. One is the problem. So really thinking about, you know, what are the issues that your organization is facing, and then that should be very clear in what they're stating if that's something that really resonates with people, particularly for work that people might not know about. The next thing is the solution. So like, you know, the need for your organization's work should be precisely stated too. You can talk about like personal anecdotes, like, you know, what does your organization's work mean to you? But you can also, you know, just talk about, you know, the work that your organization is doing, and finally really getting to this last piece, being able to describe the impact that you're making, right? So like in that first one, HG really highlighted the numbers of young people that have come through their doors, and really highlighting, you know, this is the people, or these are the number of nights that people were protected. This is how many young people were sheltered in Nashville. So I think that's really important, because for a lot of people, that impact piece will actually be some of the most critical kind of points where they really resonate. So like if your organization maybe didn't necessarily, like the work that you all were doing didn't necessarily resonate with somebody, the way they might give is they can recognize the impact. So really, you know, thinking about, you know, what would bring that person in to kind of really make a small gift or donation sometime, or even just, you know, subscribing to your newsletter or following you on social media. Yeah, Kaki.
Kind of add something to the elevator pitch. One of the things is finding the end for giving your elevator pitch, right? So when I was at a nonprofit, we had pens, and I actually carried them in my purse. If I ever saw a board member without a pen, I'd put one on them. And during board members' meetings, we would, first of all, practice our elevator pitches, and they have to be authentic. They have to be your story, not some story that you've heard somewhere. So we really worked at how do we talk about the work that we do here. But then we also practiced at board members meetings. How do you get the end to tell that story? So if someone were to comment on the pen, they would obviously, you'd have an end to say, talk about Renewal House. But also if you were at a gathering and someone started talking about their kids, you could say, oh, you should just, I saw the greatest kids the other day at Renewal House. Let me tell you about them. Or if someone was talking about the weather, boy, I was at Renewal House the other day. It was such a gorgeous day. And there were kids, we really practiced how do we find those moments where we can give that elevator speech. They need to be authentic to who you are. They need to be natural with the way you do things, but pens do a great job of that. Stickers do a great job of that. Something that opens the door so that you can tell people about the cause that you're interested in. And again, this is important because we're in a justice movement, and we have to get the words out. We have to get the message out that it's important to all of us. There's another, I think it's Audre Lorde, that says, if you're coming to save me, please keep your saviorism to yourself. But if you're coming because your liberation is tied up with my liberation, then let's work together. And so I think that that's part of what the elevator speech does, is it gives you an opportunity to tell the story, to see if people understand that their well-being and the well-being of your community are tied together. It also, if you find that the person is interested and continues to ask questions, it's a way that you can say, well, let me send you some more information. Let me put you on our email list. And again, gets them in that kind of cycle of relationship building, so that whether they give now or they give later, that they can give their time, their talent, their treasure to further your issue. I'll hand it back over.
Yeah. So for a little bit more interaction, pull out a pen or a piece of paper, because what we're actually going to do is we're going to spend a few minutes actually thinking of an elevator speech for the organization you're working with, or like your student group or things like that. We're going to take a few minutes, and then if you're finished, maybe share with a partner and think about that really quickly. We'll be walking around to see if you want to volunteer your time or volunteer and share it, then we're happy to listen to it, or if you need some help and feedback. So we're going to take a few minutes. And I guess if you're at home on a computer, maybe open up a Word document or something and just type one out. Because I think, it's really important to kind of get these words down on paper and think about them critically, and then get some practice in as you sort of think about what fundraising looks like. I don't know if we could play music or something for a few minutes, but if not, that's okay. We'll just work in silence. We don't have to work in silence, though. You can talk to each other. Just checking in on some time too, because, does anybody feel like sharing theirs? Not entirely necessary. I'm happy to share mine. And I didn't do much thinking about this beforehand, but again, I'll make a pitch really quickly, about my Asian Pacific Islander serving organization. And maybe this is centered around, why we support like a funder that supports LGBTQ plus work. So I'll just jump right into it. So like my example pitch was like, hey, my name is Joseph Gutierrez, my pronouns are he, him, and I work with API Middle Tennessee. We're the only open and affirming Asian Pacific Islander serving organization in the state of Tennessee. And, it's really important for us to think about because, it's a very dire circumstances for our young people. Over 40% of Asian Pacific Islander queer young people have seriously contemplated suicide, and up to 17% of them have actually made an attempt at suicide too. So it's a very important issue to our community, and those numbers are really low just because students don't report that. So I think it's very important that we're open and affirming and really thinking about supporting LGBTQ young Asian Pacific Islanders. So that's very important. So your support would really help us today if really advocating for our young people, creating safe and welcoming spaces. That's my pitch. You don't need to clap. But some stuff I think about there too is, like these statistics, a lot of people really find statistics very helpful when you're talking about it. So yeah, do we have somebody who wants to share? Yeah, perfect.
Does this work? Okay.
I didn't finish it, but I'm going to freeball it just for the experience. Okay. Hello, my name is Carson Hamlin. My pronouns are he, him. I am a psychology major at MTSU, and I'm currently working on research to find out if LGBTQ plus members experience doubt in their identities when faced with anti-LGBTQ media or protests. And I was really wondering if you would help me by possibly funding my experience in this research.
No, I think that's great, because a lot of it is really just you need the practice, right? Like you just need to practice saying the words and making the pitch. That was great. I think it's really important. And it's important work. That research is really important. Cool. Do we have another who wants to submit a pitch? Yeah.
So I was just gonna do my Lambda pitch that I do for everyone when they come to tabling events. I'm trying to make sure I can do it right. Basically, whenever someone's like, what does Lambda do? I'm like, well, we're a social group. We do stuff like board game nights, movie nights, PowerPoint nights, poetry and presentation. We're an educational group. We have campus resources come to our meetings to give people information about what kind of resources there are on campus, such as career advising, different courses such as Dr. Marissa Richmond, Dr. Shane, and a couple other people. Sorry, I'm thinking in my head because I hate hearing myself in the mic. I tell them that we're a social group, that we do the board game nights and those other kind of groups. We do educational stuff and the resource stuff. We also do stuff like activism. We partner with the YDSA, the College Democrats, to do stuff like letter writing campaigns, postcard writing campaigns, just getting people aware of the things going on. And really, I just tell people that we're a support group. We're here for students, and we're here to make sure students have a place to come and feel accepted.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and again, I think, providing a clear summary of what the work's doing, especially, if the work of your organization is not always apparent or very clear, I think it's really important to share what you all do. I guess we can open up to questions really quickly if people have questions.
All right, so when you were talking about identifying potential donors, you then went on to say that you would want to weigh that against maintaining the organization's integrity. So let's say I have no idea why Chick-fil-A might not be a good match for my organization. Is there a go-to site that can give me some objective type information on corporations in particular and stuff like that?
Huh. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of any database, but we can look into that for you too, actually. And one of the things we have here is this QR code with a Google document we figured that we'd keep like a living document with a few different fundraising resources. So we'll throw it up there if we find it. But, I think it's for organizations, I think, this donation acceptance policy is really important in thinking about and clarifying what your organization's values are. So, for API Middle Tennessee, this Asian Pacific Islander serving organization I work with, one of our first value or like our criteria on our donation acceptance policy is that a corporation or individual does no harm to Asian Pacific Islanders. And, that's very clear when we start thinking about, like, would we take a donation from Nike, right? When Nike exploits labor in Malaysia, right? So I think for us, we had this talk through very clearly, they're not aligned with our values because they're, exploitation of labor is very important, and really thinking about, global equity and sort of, what it means to have a fair living wage in a developing nation. So, I think part of it, that exercise is at first, clarifying your values and thinking about times when to test them. But I'll go ahead and do this look about seeing. Yeah, there's probably a few sites that measure like sort of like corporate integrity and stuff like that. Particularly, I know there's that like sort of thinking about, environmental and carbon footprints too. Which if you're doing environmental work is very important. So we'll take a look into that. But yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, and if you email us, we're happy to share some donation acceptance policies too. So if that's something you wanted to see some templates around or wanted to see what some other organizations were thinking about, we're happy to share those too. Another question? Yeah.
What would you say to like a person or organization who is making their first pitch or their first pitch to somebody for funding or for any sort of money to go into their organization?
So I think that if you start with what's meaningful to the person that you're asking to give. Did I hear your question correctly? Can you repeat it? Because I want to be sure I'm answering from your
I was just
perspective.
wondering if there's any special tips for people when they're going into their very first pitch to a individual or a donor organization or any sort of group that's going to give them funding, like the very first time they go into it.
I'm so glad I asked you to say the question again. Yes. Do you know the number one reason people give? The number one reason people give is because someone asked, and yet we're so afraid to ask. And so what I would say is be sure that you are going to finally make that ask, get past that lump that forms in your throat, because I had it. And say, we really need your support. So you have your elevator speech or that thing that brings a person hope that they can be something, some part of a change that's bigger than themselves. We all want to be part of a movement that brings about liberation, or the people that you're going to want to give want that. So, if you can practice and get over that fear of simply asking, will you give to us? And sometimes some people say, ask for a specific amount. Will you give $25? Will you give $1,000? For me, I usually say, will you make a gift that's meaningful to you, or make a gift that is commensurate with how passionate you feel about this issue. But the number one reason people give is because someone asked them to give. So we've got to tell the story. We've got to ask. Give us your time, your talent, your treasure. And if you can get the first two, their time and talent, the money will follow. Remember to make the ask. Any other questions?
We have one from the
Joseph may
chat.
have
Sorry, just to quickly add on to that one too. It's also dependent on who you're asking, right? So if you're fundraising from your peers, like when I ask my friends, like I know my friends aren't going to be capable of giving large amounts of money, or sometimes even money at all. So, like recognizing, what is the other ways for them to be involved? Like, hey, if you can't make a donation, like, can you join us at our next text banking party? So you can help us spread the word about our work and get people engaged in that way. So, what are the non-monetary asks too that you can get people involved in?
Sit next to me all day and click admit when people join the Zoom, and then press the space bar for the PowerPoint slides. Doesn't cost a thing, just takes all of your time. We have a question from the Zoom. You mentioned negative screening. Any tips for how to balance when it's worth reaching out to edge cases?
That is a great question. So again, I think go back to what Joseph talked about, clarify what your values are as an organization. There are going to be some clear ones that are negative screens, but this question is saying if you negative screen everyone out, do you risk that you're missing an opportunity to bring someone closer in alignment with what your values are and what your purpose is? Do you miss the opportunity to convert them from someone who is on the edge to a clear ally, or someone who was working against your mission into at least a neutral position? So I think absolutely you need to think as a group. I always think as an individual, I have an individual's perspective, but when you think together as a community or as a Lambda chapter, think about, is this approach to this organization, does it completely compromise our values, or is there an opportunity that it'll advance our mission and bring them into alignment with our mission, bring them closer to being an ally? Those two are strategies that are legitimate. A lot of it is just being conscious of what you're doing. Again, I believe that group think, that clarity bubbles up from community. So when you're trying to ask those questions about, is this an organization or an individual that we want to approach for funding in hopes of getting them closer and aligned with our mission, think about it as a group together, because that's where the learning is going to take place. And I do personally believe that kind of truth bubbles up from community. Hope I answered the question, or at least muddied the water, which I think is what that question did, is that not all fundraising is clear, and that we are in a discernment process, and that, again, it happens in community. Are there any other questions?
The person said thank you, and you did answer their question.
Okay, good.
Yeah, again, fundraising again is a relationship. So yeah, it's not always going to be easy. So it's push and pull too. So if you're talking to funders that are on the edge or really thinking about, how they land with their values, just ask. And if they're not, they're not. So that's fine.
So thanks for inviting us. It was a great opportunity for Joseph and I to work together, kind of putting together our thoughts. We encourage you to look at community-centric fundraising, that sense of belonging, that work of justice and liberation that fundraising can facilitate. If you need solace in knowing that there are allies out there, look at Nonprofit AF. They'll make you laugh, if nothing else. And for sure, reach out to us if there's anything that we can do that will further your mission. So thank you.